So our next panel is an important one, talking about long poles to Mars, basically technologies that take a long period of time to develop in order to be able to be ready before we can go to Mars. And this has been a topic of discussion for Explore Mars for many years. Our fourth Achieving Mars workshop focused on, I believe, 12 long poles that were important, critical for getting to Mars. And so our next panel, we'll be looking at how much these long poles have changed over the last 8 years. And leading this is Joe Cassady, who you've seen before. He's Executive Vice President of Explore Mars and Director of Civil Space at L3Harris. Joe?
All right, well, welcome back from break. We're excited to be able to give you a little bit of an overview of some of these challenging technologies, as Chris said. And we've got a wonderful panel here this morning. I'm just going to let them each tell you something about the work that they're doing. I'll introduce them, let them give a little bit of a talk, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end of the session here. So first up is Angela Krenn. Angela has over 20 years of experience at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. She's worked operations, design, analysis, and research related to cryogenic systems for ground and space applications. She also has experience with architecture development, integration, and thermal management for moderate and high temperature applications. Currently, Angela is supporting NASA's Space Technology Mission Directorate as both the technical integration lead and the principal technologist for surface systems. So, Angela,
Thank you,
welcome.
Joe. It's so great to be here. Thank you. All right. So we talk about long poles for Mars, and of course, I'm going to start with some of the obvious ones. So I took this image from the architecture definition document, and it provides a pretty good summary of the main initial long poles to get to Mars and get back, right? So how are we going to do that? So of course, the transportation system is a challenge, and it's a long pole for a couple of different reasons. Obviously, there's a lot of technology development required to enable the systems, but also we haven't yet made a decision on which transportation system will be optimal. And if you heard Patrick's talk earlier, that's not one of the first decisions that has to be made, right? So that pushes that decision out a little bit further because it's reliant on some of the initial decisions. And then also there's a lot of decisions that flow back from that after that decision is made. So from a technology standpoint, that puts us in the position of trying to put multiple bets on the table to develop technologies that are potentially going to be used in no matter which ultimate transportation system is chosen. So right now within the trade space, we're looking at nuclear electric propulsion with a chemical stage also, solar electric propulsion with a chemical stage, nuclear thermal propulsion, and also an all-chemical option. So there are key technology developments in each one of these areas that we're currently investing in to try to move the needle forward. So when that decision is made, we'll be in a good position to pick the right option and move forward there. Also, we have to be able to land, right? So we talked a little bit earlier, you heard Prasan talk about right. the HIAD and the lofted demonstration. That all went really well, but it was still fairly small compared to what we need to do to land the masses that we're talking about on Mars. So we're working with our industry partners to try to scale that up and continue growing that capability, but also that's not been decided either, right? So we also have to look at other potential options such as like a vertical descent. So there's a lot of potential work there. And then how do we get back off the plant, off the surface, right? So an ascent vehicle. And a lot of that is maybe more of an engineering challenge if you think of it just from an ascent perspective, but when you start thinking about how do you actually enable the fueling process, the volumes of liquids required to get off of the surface, that then drives you into potentially needing autonomous systems and autonomous fluid transfers and things like that, which also are going to be. We're looking at a bunch of different power generation options, and this is a couple of artist renditions of surface power, fission surface power on the surface of the moon and Mars. So that's one potential option, but again, that decision is on the table to potentially go forward with a recommendation later this year. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, so next up we have Chris Boger from Draper, and Chris is a program director in the Space Systems Program Office at Draper. He's responsible for the human spaceflight and exploration market area. His portfolio includes NASA Commercial Lunar Payload Services, or CLPS, NASA Human Landing System, NASA Space Launch System, NASA Orion, NASA International Space, it's pretty much everything. NASA Human Research Program, NASA Gateway, and he's responsible for the avionics and G&C prime contract with NASA Johnson Space Flight Center. Prior to this position, Chris served in roles as an electrical designer, a systems engineer, and a line manager for a whole lot of programs and organizations during his 15-year tenure at Draper. He's been supporting customers across the DoD and other U.S. government organizations. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks a lot, Joe. I appreciate that. And thanks for giving my brief without having me have to do it here.
Right.
So I thought I would use this couple of minutes to just orient folks about Draper a little bit and obviously some of the important technology areas that we focus on relevant to human space travel. A few of the areas right now off the top: autonomous and piloted guidance, navigation, and control. This includes everything from ascent, descent, and landing on planetary bodies, rendezvous proxops, RPOD, and Earth reentry and hypersonic flight. So we've pretty much run the gambit associated with autonomous and piloted guidance, navigation, and control. Another really key area is the fault-tolerant system architecture and high-reliability flight computing. Really, it's associated with the difficult environments upon which space travel will have to weather, and ultimately being able to design systems that can withstand that. Which kind of carries to the next one about radiation hardening and the ability to have electronic systems operate in difficult radiation environments. But also we've spent some time developing some specialized sensors and electronic systems, whether it's in support of science or actually for guidance systems or other technology development to enable those technologies. And finally, and probably more recently, is really the use of model-based design, both on the software side as well as the system engineering side, to also be carried through on simulation and the verification and validation. So how do we apply these technologies? This is a smattering of some areas that we've worked. Starting in the upper right is really where it all began, not only for Draper, but for human space travel in general on the Earth here. That's a contract that Draper was, I guess our previous company was known as the MIT Instrumentation Laboratory before we became Draper. We were the first contract levied on the Apollo program.
Wow.
For developing the flight computer and the flight software for that. And almost as impressive as that is the fact that Western Union telegram actually represents the contract that was levied in order to do that. So the government was able to get someone on contract with something that could fit on a slide, unlike today. Moving from there a little bit around the history here, obviously the next phase in human spaceflight travel came with the shuttle. We've been working with Sierra Space, previously Sierra Nevada, on Dream Chaser, Cygnus. We have roles on ISS. All the elements of Artemis right now, from Orion, SLS, Gateway, and the HLS. And then we've had some roles on some space science missions as well that we have highlighted at the bottom. And I think most recently, to kind of round this out, Draper is a prime contractor on the CLPS IDIQ. We did receive our first task order just about 2 years ago for the CP-12 mission, which will bring 3 science payloads to the far side near the South Pole of the Moon in 2026. So I thought I would pick a couple of things that are relevant to Draper's area that represent the theme of this panel here associated with long poles in technology development. Certainly the first would be precision landing and GNC to enable the human Mars missions. There's obviously a lot of reasons why precision landing and GNC is important. Pre-positioning of assets, the long duration surface excursions without the infrastructure associated with being able to navigate on the surface, the ability to map from a scientific perspective and more generally, and then the entry and landing profiles that would be able to support a deconditioned crew. So that was one area. I'll kind of leave it at that so I don't steal the whole panel time here. And then the second area really is associated with the human missions to endure prolonged radiation exposure. This really touches not only the electronics and the capability of the vehicle, but also the conditions that the human and the crew will ultimately have to endure, and the cumulative exposure associated with that. So, the real enablers and hurdles really are, radiation hardening. So this is a somewhat of a solved problem, but certainly has a mass cost and a cost associated with being able to do that effectively. Fault-tolerant computing to deal with any effects and errors that happen associated with the travel, and if there was a way we could shorten the transit time, right? Whether it's nuclear propulsion or otherwise, would certainly be beneficial to the human element of that, and onboard protection for the humans again would come at a swap cost. Draper's in a really unique situation. I didn't touch on this much, and I'll get off the stage with this, or I'll stay on the stage, but I'll get off the speaking role. Not only do we have a long history of working in the human, the human performance side of things, as well as the technology for space travel, we also have a growing area in the biotech area as well. So I think the combination of these three would really be a beneficial way to bring things together in a unique way for bringing humans to Mars. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. All right, next up we have Dr. Jancy McPhee. She currently serves as the Associate Chief Scientist for the NASA Human Research Program. In this role, she helps build science strategies and implement research goals, coordinating with government, international, and commercial partners across various physiological disciplines, space missions, and Earth-based simulations of life in space. She supports the program goal to safeguard the health and performance of astronauts on exploration missions. Jancy.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the conference so far, and we are here to talk about getting humans to Mars, as this lovely artistic representation suggests. So let me start by explaining that the NASA Human Research Program is an applied research program. It's not a basic science program. Our job is to ensure the human health and performance of astronauts on these future exploration missions. And we heard a lot this morning about the amazing work that we're doing through the Artemis program to get to the moon and focus on doing science at the moon. But when we go to Mars, some of those risks that we're worried about get even greater. And these are representing the 5 hazards that we worry about when we think about putting the human body into space. So in engineering, we will refer to ourselves as the human system, which includes the human body and all of the things that are designed around it to support it. But when we're en route to Mars, we are more concerned about the long-term exposure to radiation, the long duration of isolation and confinement, the remoteness from Earth, the different gravity levels that we will encounter as the human, and also the need to have an enclosed environment with all of our resources on board and able to be used and recycled as necessary. And we didn't get to design the human system like some of my colleagues are getting to do. So a lot of what we do is a bit of an exploration of trying to understand the response of the human system to these various space hazards. And we heard a lot this morning about the Moon to Mars strategy and the major goals and objectives of those missions to the moon and then onward to Mars. And the human is intimately associated with many of the operational and science goals and objectives. So we intimately link ourselves to the Humans to Mars architecture planning to achieve those scientific and operational objectives. And so you're not supposed to literally read this thing. It's just to show you that there's an intimate relationship between, on the left, our research plans to try to overcome what we recognize as some of the major risks to the human system. What are we going to do exactly? What are the studies we're going to do? How they help inform the architecture definition to achieve the objectives for the Moon to Mars program. And then similarly, as the Moon to Mars programs evolve and become more clearly defined, we can then pivot and adjust our research to make sure that we understand what we expect to happen to the human on these missions, as well as put countermeasures into place to ensure that they are healthy and able to perform whatever those goals and objectives are. So these are the 8 highest concerning risks that are agreed upon between the research program and also operations. So this is an agreement. If you don't see your favorite concern or risk on this chart, please don't think that we're not still thinking about it. This is just those that are of highest concern across not just the human research program, but our hand-in-hand partners in operations as well. And since we were asked to try to identify amongst those top risks, our very, very top risks, I have boxed in a couple that are very pertinent to our discussion today about having the human able to survive in space. And that is the independence for these Mars missions, the autonomy that the humans will need in order to execute these Mars missions, and the vehicle designs that will be required to support that autonomy. Food is a big challenge for us as well. We're having limited mass and volume. It's a long trip. It's going to have to be nutritious and long shelf life. All the effects of the length of the mission are an incredible factor for us to consider because of the long-term exposure of the human to a reduced level of gravity, both in transit and on the surface of Mars, as well as just the length of time that you're in a small vehicle, relatively speaking, with the same people in a highly stressful situation. And also, along with those gravitational impacts are potentially changes to the bones, the muscles, our vision systems. And then many of the Mars architecture plans consider that, after this long transit to Mars, we'll land on the surface of the planet and perhaps give ourselves a little bit of rest time so that things like our sensory motor systems have a little bit of time to recover. But we do also have to consider what if everything doesn't go exactly as planned. So it is very important for us to understand the anticipated effects on the sensory motor system and how we might best counteract those.
Thank you. All right, so now, last to speak is Grant Anderson. Mr. Anderson co-founded Paragon in 1993. And he's now president and CEO. Before that, he held diverse positions at Paragon, including chief engineer, VP of engineering, treasurer, secretary, CFO. You did everything, didn't you? Mm-hmm. And he led the systems and conceptual design of multiple human spacecraft and the design of the International Space Station solar arrays in a previous position. He's been on multiple nonprofit boards, including schools, charity organizations, and the Tucson Metro Chamber of Commerce. So Grant, thank you, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Whoops, somebody advanced it for me. That's this is not a sales on Paragon. Paragon turns 31 actually next week, so May 11th. Is that next week? That's actually Saturday, right?
Okay.
And I'm 61 years old, so that means half my life has been doing Paragon. If anybody would have told me 30 years ago, I don't know. So Paragon's been involved in life support, but one of the things about us, we only do life support. We're the only company that just concentrates on life support and thermal control in extreme environments. Space being the ultimate extreme environment, it's most of what we do, but we also do underwater systems, mine refuge systems, and stuff of that nature. Anywhere where if what we do fails, you'll die instantly as opposed to slowly, that's pretty much what we do. And we've been involved in every single architectural study, like I said, and in fact, the Dragon Environmental Control Life Support System architecture is Paragon's. The CST-100 that was supposed to take off last night and hopefully will on Friday is also ours. You're not also supposed to read this chart, but this is sort of a life support thing. You'll find out my theme is the long pole in the tent is the life support system in general. And that encompasses a lot of things. What conference are we at? We're at the Humans to Mars conference. We're not the Spacecraft to Mars conference. And not saying we've done that and been there and done that, but if even George Mueller way back in 1968 said, well, we got to figure out guidance, navigation, control, landing, and life support to go to Mars. Well, we kind of figure out the first two, although landing enough mass is definitely a big one. But that life support one, we do not have an existence proof at this time that we can get people there and back. In fact, you've heard a lot of arguments of direct to Mars, why go to the moon, why moon to Mars. I'm a very big fan of moon to Mars because I'd rather prove something out at 3 days from Earth than 9 months from Earth. Just if you need some orientation, there's air management, which is something that was on Jancy's chart. There's water management, recycling of water collection, and what we call polishing to get it back to drinkable standards. There's the crew systems themselves that comes with everything else, clothes and washcloths and food and things like that. I actually have a chapter of a book, I'm not making a plug because I don't make any money on this, coming out this month on interstellar life support systems. And I do have the controversial statement, will you need clothes? I'm not turning this into an X-rated program here. And then the waste management itself, I think it's an unspoken secret, not really an unspoken secret, that no toilet works in space or has worked how people expect them to. That's a big area for us. And then finally, thermal control. Once you keep an astronaut breathing, they want to be at the right temperature, and they're pretty picky about that. In fact, much pickier than electronics. A person is a lot harder to keep at the right temperature than a piece of electronics. So that kind of gives you your idea of the major elements. One of the things we get a lot is, haven't we done this before? ISS has been flown for 24 years. We've got a life support system. Just talk to Robin Gaines or anybody else. There's been a problem with life support system every 3 to, I think, outside 8 months on something gone wrong. The other thing is that none of them, only about 80% of what's gone wrong in the life support system would have become evident on a ground-based test because of the microgravity environment. So your microgravity is a function that just messes up biology in different ways. And then finally, you can't really test a life support system in an accelerated environment. If you want one to last for 3 years, you need to test it for 3, 5, 7, 8 years, because biology doesn't speed up just for you. Yeah, there's some, you can raise the temperature a little bit and biological growth happens a little faster, but you don't know about the fouling and the chemical makeup of the water changing over time and eating away a heat exchanger or something like that. You don't find that out until you do it, and it's very, very hard to accelerate. So when we talk about long poles, that testing regime that gets up to the point where you can say, yes, I can convince the astronauts and I can convince myself that ethically I can send these people to Mars because they have as good a chance as I can give them to make it there and back. That takes some testing and some confidence behind you, and you have to be able to do that. So that's really all I wanted to say, but I look forward to questions.
Great. Well, thank you very much, all of you. So I'm going to shift over a little bit now to the portion of the panel where I'll ask some questions of the presenters. We are going to leave a little bit of time at the end, so be thinking now of what questions you might have as well. So I'm going to start with you, Grant, and work our way backwards, and then we'll just bounce back and forth. So what do you consider the measure of success for a Mars-capable life support system?
I would say the measure of success is consistency and non-drift. Really what happens with life support systems, they drift over time. The pH starts to move in certain things. Your food system, what you took up there and you're eating at day 6 has the same nutritional value as something at 9 months down the line. That's really where I see that going, and also the recycling aspect, what's called the closure. How much can you recycle? There are some very big sweet spots in there. Paragon long ago in our 30 years said, okay, concentrate on water first, then oxygen, whether it's going for that extra carbon molecule by getting out the CO2, or at least just being able to recycle the oxygen in general. And go down the hierarchy of those and do the ones that make sense. and don't do the ones that don't make sense. If you have a recycling or reclosure system that is so complex that you're going to end up repairing it all the time on the way to the moon, on the way to Mars, that is not a good trade.
Right.
I'd rather do the extra 100 pounds or...
Kind of like buying the car with all the bells and whistles on it to brake all the time, rather
Yes.
than just the standard car.
Yeah, and that's, I will say, I'm not an autonomy fan. I'm especially not an AI fan on board for a whole bunch of reasons, mainly because they're really good for coming up with fixing the things that you thought about. They're extremely bad in what we call black swan events. They do not do well. The human mind is the greatest thing for a black swan event. The intuitional, okay, what do we do? And another controversial thing I say is there is no mission control after you're 5 seconds from Earth.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue. I was going to ask Jancy this question. Given how far away the crew is going to be on the mission to Mars, what are some of the concerns that you would have for human crew members in terms of, being that far away and not having that direct link? Could you speak to that a little bit?
So that does get at the autonomy and our need to have very clear roles and responsibilities between the human and all the devices and the tools that we're going to have on board, and exactly, it's the human system interface. What are we providing? How user-friendly is it? Are we going to be able to distinguish the thermal control from the eject button? These things are very, very important. And so that's crucial. It's a long trip, so it's going to be very important to have refreshers. To have a little just-in-time training. Let's say there's a medical event and, oh my goodness, I haven't figured out how to use the ultrasound for over a year, since pre-training. I need a little refresher here, a little bit of autonomous guidance, because it may be an emergency situation and I can't call home. I'm going to need some decision support.
Do you think you'll do like fire drills and things like that, practices for some off-nominal events?
We already do those, even for the missions that we're already working on. It's a pretty famous thing to try to challenge the crew and help them to understand how to use their tools in sort of everyone's worst nightmare scenario. To your point, though, we can't anticipate everything. Right. So to a certain extent, they have to train in a broad perspective so that when the unique situation comes up, they're ready and they're prepared.
Great. Thank you. Chris, for you, maybe, how critical is precision landing? You mentioned that as one of your areas to being able to set up a base on either the moon or Mars.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think, given how little we really know about Mars compared to other, say, the moon or something else, I mean, I think being able to accurately land where we need to be, whether it's, near resources or, near the other assets that we've put down there, becomes increasingly important because, when we first get there, there's going to be limited opportunity for movement or correction for errors associated with missteps in landing. So the further away you are and the more of an unexplored, realm that you're going to, just ups the game that much more associated with how precisely we have to execute. And it goes to the human element as well. I mean, any cost associated with that human needing to travel further in order to get to the resources,
yeah. Right.
Those might be costs that can't be endured given the resources that they brought with them, or what state they're in when they finally get there. So it couldn't be more important, especially when you're taking into account the human element.
Oh yeah, we all remember what Matt Damon had to go through in The Martian.
Yes.
Yeah. So Angela, you mentioned earlier some of the work that we're doing in human-class Mars transit capabilities. How is NASA investing in technologies right now to build up those capabilities?
Yeah, so since we don't have a decision yet on what that transportation system's going to be, and we have a very limited budget, we're trying to be smart about how we make those investments, where we can invest across the wide variety of technology areas, but also leverage our partners and leverage other government agencies and industry to invest in ways that can be useful near term and then can be expanded later to eventually lead to a Mars mission. So some examples, we have an investment with solar electric propulsion that's going to be used for the Gateway boost stage, and so that could be extensible eventually to a Mars mission. We also have a partnership with DARPA to do the Draco mission, which is a nuclear thermal propulsion engine that should be going in the next couple of years. And then, as I mentioned, in all of the trade options, there is a chemical stage component, so that's going to require cryogenic fluid management technologies. We have 4 different tipping points with industry partners to develop and demonstrate some of those cryo fluid management technologies that we've been developing over the last 10 or so years. SpaceX recently did a successful demonstration of a cryogenic transfer in space. And then we've got 3 more partners that are going to be doing some other missions to demonstrate some of that cryo technology in the coming year or 2.
So quite a bit going on, actually.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
That's great. Well, I'm gonna swing back this way now, so I'll give you a follow-up one here. The NASA ULA partnered low Earth orbit flight test of an inflatable decelerator, or LOFTED, project recently had a successful test. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how that might feed forward to a human Mars mission?
Yeah, so Prasanth talked about that a little bit this morning. You guys
Yeah.
got to see the video. So that was a very, very positive outcome demonstration a little over a year ago. The HIAD was able to demonstrate both that it was, it was packed in real tight and it was able to deploy properly without any issues. It inflated to the right pressure, it inflated in the right time frame, didn't have any concerns there. When it went through reentry, it got to the temperatures expected and performed very well. And so, yeah, that was a really significant step in the right direction. But as I mentioned, it is a smaller scale than what we'll need for a Mars mission, right? So, again,
So
trying to
scale up
leverage
is
those
still,
industry interests and partnerships to try to build up the capability to take the next step into making it a little bit bigger and more capable so that we can eventually get into the range of 25 tons, capable of landing on Mars. And the other thing about the HIAD is it does have some potential application in other missions as well. So trying to work with SMD and the folks there to make sure that we're pursuing all of the potential applications for that technology.
Great, super. Chris, what do you think the Artemis program plan can do to help us burn down the risk for precision landing at Mars?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'll just expand the question, I guess, a little bit, maybe to include the CLIPS program. I know, obviously they're discrete programs, but they're obviously supporting one another. So, I mean, robotic landing on the moon, making that a more routine element, as CLIPS is attempting to do with a broader, provider base, right, to include the commercial industry, I think will go a long way at maturing technologies at a pace that, just kind of one-off, NASA-funded missions won't be able to do. And a lot of those technologies will be, applicable to what we're trying to do on Mars and other planets, right? But in general, the work we're doing on Artemis as well, that is to bring humans to the surface of the moon. And I think, a lot has changed since Apollo. I think, when astronauts were landing on the moon then, they were in control largely, not entirely, of the mission. And I think, the paradigm of how much the human remains in the loop for, and how much they even have direct visibility into, the surface they're trying to land on is, I think, what NASA and the Artemis program is wrestling with now. I'm hopeful that those advances will help kind of get that new paradigm in place for when we do decide to move towards Mars, and that we're not yet again trying to take a big leap in terms of, what the, 60 years that passed between the times that we landed humans on the moon, right? So I think both the CLIPS program and Artemis will do a lot to serve and be able to leverage that learning for putting humans on Mars.
Great. Back to you, Jancy. You mentioned earlier if things didn't go right, so if you're in a situation and you're on your landing and maybe something's a little bit askew, what concerns do you have about that in terms of the human, then needing to do something on a planetary surface?
So one of the big concerns, of course, is there are changes to our sensory motor systems. during these long trips in microgravity. And then we have very little information about what will happen at 3/8 G as well. Will it feel to the human system more like microgravity or more like 1G on Earth? And we have some suspicions, but no evidence as to exactly what that's going to be like. So as I mentioned earlier, some of the plans are to basically try to build a rest period into the architecture. But if that doesn't go exactly right, will we need to be able to put our suits on and go outside and check on something or deploy something? Will we be okay, but our crew member perhaps is not feeling so good? And is he or she getting dehydrated? And perhaps we need to help them put an IV in there. And there's some changes early on, in those shifts between different gravitational levels in kind of our motor control systems as well. We even be able to apply an IV when it's really needed. So these are a lot of the things that we'd like to test, and not to talk about the low Earth orbit world, but we do have a lot more opportunities to test some of these capabilities in simulated situations. And there is actually an international movement to try to use the ISS as a test bed for Mars. So that includes on orbit, being able to do medical capabilities, and also shortly after landing and returning to 1G, which may turn out to be sort of similar to 3/8 G. We'll only know when we get there. Right. So there will be a lot of testing to try to identify what can we do. If resting is not the option, to help each other, because everyone has a slightly different response to the space environment. How can we facilitate our recovery? Things like that.
Great. All right, Grant. I want to pull on a thread that you started a little bit ago when you showed your chart. Why is thinking about the ecosystem early in a design cycle important?
We are the payload. Ultimately, you never send a human into space without an ecosystem around them. It's a really short, ugly trip. But you will send an ecosystem for a test flight without a human. What we have found, and one of the things that Paragon's excelled in, is we are systems engineers, ultimate systems engineers, because we touch everybody. So thinking about what the life support system is going to do, and I mean in totality, there's a seminal paper I wrote with Dr. Leslie Wickman back 20 years ago now on activities-based design of spacecraft. In other words, you figure out what you're going to do in the spacecraft, then you figure out the space you need. And in the past, it's been more of the spacecraft has to be shaped by this for aerodynamic reasons or whatever else, and therefore, now cram the life support system into it. But then even more, getting back to psychological aspects and everything else, the human is a complex system inside a complex system. And we're talking about testing a complex system of the spacecraft. One of the things, and this is a little segue, but I'm worried about the human system. What happens, we've talked about, we don't know what long-term effects are. I would say that we're at a point where human physiology studies in space are 20% hypothesis-based science and 80% discovery-based science. The body is highly adaptable. I've been an epigenetics freak for 20 years. When I first heard about it, epigenetics is essentially the selective change in turning on and off of genes in your body as you adapt to stuff. I'm really worried that humans going to start adapting as we're going out there and coming back and being on Mars, and we're going to see things that pop up we've never even seen on Earth before. So that was maybe a little bit farther than where you want me to go, but I'm really worried about that. But the best we can do is
it's a little hard to know exactly what to design for if things are changing all the time.
Changing all the time. And yes, no, it's not an automatic adaptation, but there's very subtle things that start happening immediately when humans are exposed to an extreme environment of one type or another. So going back to what you asked, if you're not thinking about the life support in the totality, psychology and human factors and everything else from the beginning, you don't end up with a good design. You end up with a kludge. And then humans are extremely good at to adapting to kludges, making it work anyway, sort of that can-do attitude. But the more you do that, the more stress you put on them psychologically. So there's a lot of reasons besides just the physics and the chemistry and the biology of life support, why you need to think about it really early.
All right, at this point, I would like to open it up to questions from the audience. And could I ask that you get a microphone, because we've got people online. So Jim, or just if you wouldn't mind, yeah, could you just make your way to the microphone? Thank you.
So this question's for Jancy. So Chris Mason was involved in the twin study, and he's written a fabulous book called The Next 500 Years, okay? So cutting to the chase, his idea is that those astronauts, the first ones to go to Mars, will be genetically selected and genetically engineered and repaired by CRISPR. Okay, so is there any of those ideas that he has brought forward in his book being considered and thought about in the program?
So we are working, we at NASA in the Human Research Program are also doing omics studies on a regular basis. So we are very interested in some of the things that Grant brought up as well. What are the potential changes, long-term environment? We are also very interested not just in the average human response to space, but also in the individualized human response to space. And the more that we understand that by collecting continual, he's referring to omics data. It sounds, but it basically means studying the genetic changes in the genetic material, the proteins, and all the different molecules from gene to operations, not just looking at the final outcome, which is the performance or the health indicators, but all of the steps that lead to those big outcomes. To really understand how do we monitor at all levels of change, as well as anticipate those changes and know when we might need to act. So we are indeed doing that as well. One of the interesting possibilities by being able to study things more at that genetic level and small molecule level is that we might be able to determine when, let's say, someone has an inability to metabolize a certain drug in space, and that's the one that is going in the general med kit. Well, you can now send that person with an alternate drug that they are better able to use in the event of having whatever syndrome it is that was, encouraging them to want to take that medication. Similarly, there are variations in people's sensitivity to radiation. We might be able to recommend additional countermeasures for someone who is showing some sort of genetic level of sensitivity. So at this time, we are generally not considering that detailed understanding at the omics level as so much as a selection basis, but more as a countermeasure support basis. The more we can understand everyone's response all the way down to the omics level and counteract that response, anticipate their response, anticipate their unique needs, the better. So that work is really, really important and is something that we are considering as well.
Other questions? Let's see, got one there in the second row. Third row, sorry. It's hard to see with the lights.
Hi, this question is for Angela. We're specifically kind of talking about the idea of like fission as an energy source. Because I already know on Earth, it's kind of like we're having a hard time getting on the same page of like moving towards fission as an energy source. Is that kind of the same thing in space, or is it kind of like a general understanding of like this is kind of the way we want to go in terms of like sustainable energy? Because again, like we have a hard time agreeing about that on Earth as an energy source.
Yeah, great question. So with all of our goals and objectives on the lunar surface, we're actually going to be developing a variety of power generation because in certain circumstances, some options are better than others. So we are looking at fission power, but also vertical solar arrays and other radioisotope options. There is also a growing interest terrestrially in terms of fission surface power that is potentially mobile. So on the 10 to 20, 30 kilowatt scale. And so I think with that growing terrestrial interest, that's also adding the momentum to be able to help make those advancements so that we could use them on the moon. And then when we get ready to go to Mars, we'll have hopefully developed the full range of possibilities. And then when we decide on the primary power generation technology, we'll have opportunities there to choose from. So,
All right, I think we have another one here in the front row.
Could Joe and the rest of the panel share with us what inspired their interest in science and space?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll start. My mom, number one, who put me in front of the TV during the Mercury program, but then obviously growing up in Apollo. So,
I work for headquarters right now, but I live in Florida. I grew up in Florida. I work at Kennedy Space Center. And so when I was growing up, I was watching space shuttle launches all the time, and it captured my imagination young, and I never grew out of it. So.
Yeah, similar. Space shuttle, watching the launches when I was younger, to include the ones that didn't go so well. I mean, really stuck with me, and wanted me to bring myself forward to help make sure that we have as successful missions as possible.
The original Star Trek. That's what inspired me, and that very positive attitude about collaborating together as the human race to continue to explore space.
I would say middle school science class. My textbook for the human body was Asimov's textbook, which I thought was cool. I knew him as a science fiction writer, but he actually wrote my textbook for biology. Wow. And that combined with an absolute obsession of airplanes, I would say, and that then went on to being the shuttle. And I remember reading Mike Collins' book about the shuttle that came out in like '78 about what it was going to do. So I think that was all of that put together.
I don't see Chris yet, so let's take one more.
I have a question for Jancy and Grant. So for the life support systems, and with the recent BPS survey that came out, the decadal, do you see a biological life support system as being the key to Mars habitats, or will it be more focused on how the ISS operates today?
Why don't you go with that one?
Okay. Yeah, really this is the physiochemical systems versus biological systems. I can tell you what's not going to happen. We're not going to be growing plants for food in space. It's extremely inefficient. I know somebody asked that question over there, and the last thing, you got to bring the matter from somewhere anyway. And yeah, you can talk about the in situ resources. I'd have a little trouble. We actually designed an experiment for NASA to test seed growth in Martian soil on the Mars 2001 lander, but didn't make it. But where biological comes in fact, in this book chapter that's coming out, and again, I don't make money on it, it comes out at the end of this month by Elsevier, I think, I say the life support system will look a lot more like a brewery than a farm for a really long duration. I believe there's a nexus of genetically engineered microorganisms producing the fundamental things that will produce your food. In fact, I love to say things that just kind of poke people, and you call me wise or a pedantic asshole, one of the two. Oh, I'm not allowed to say that. Sorry about that.
Hopefully we got that.
But
Bleep.
That nexus of being able to generate those things means the number one 3D printer in space will be the food printer, I think.
Thank you.
How's that?
Well, listen, I think we're out of time, but help me thank our panel.